Hello, welcome to Impersonal Opinion. I'm Chandler Klebs and I'm here with George Ortega, and this is the show where we share our opinions and don't take anything personally. George had suggested in the last episode that we talk some more about happiness and how everything else we do is seems to be related to happiness, pleasure, what makes us feel good. George, you've been studying happiness for a long time. So, um, so how did you first come to the conclusion that everything was really about happiness?
Um, I I think it may have been something that I just like thought it out, just like this free will thing that, when you think about it, why does anyone do anything? If it's not like to feel happy or to become happier, to feel happier. Because what's the point of anything otherwise, right? So like, and then I learned that Aristotle, however many years ago, reached the same conclusion. He wrote that everything else is a means in life except that happiness is the only end in life. Everything else is a means to happiness.
Yeah, and it seems plainly obvious. I would think that's fairly uncontroversial, but at the same time, look at the things people do that make them unhappy.
And when that is and you think this thing about people not getting free will is curious. There's our entire culture. Like they started researching happiness back in the late '50s, and one of the things that they discovered is that we humans are really bad at predicting what activities are going to make us happier, like in the future and stuff. And it may be a result of like modern society that we're not so good right now. Because, like for example, a lot of people think, well, if I become really rich, I'm going to be really happy. But according to the research, above the poverty line, once like a person is no longer poor, having or earning whatever more money makes either very little difference or no difference at all. In general. So like, you know, I still can't understand why people don't get that happiness is all they want. And the other part of it is like, if somebody wants to like, be a good pianist or a guitarist, or a singer or something, they practice and they become better and better. So I still don't get how like, how there aren't like happiness gyms and like, how we don't teach happiness in schools. And I still don't get how most people are just clueless in terms of like, the science and practice and art of happiness.
Well, yeah, and here's the deal, George. Look at the things people do and the things people believe. Everything they do seems to be, towards pleasure and away from pain, a hedonic imperative, or whichever is the greater of two goods, the lesser of two evils. But the standard of good, I believe, is based in happiness.
Well, yeah, John Locke said that a few centuries ago. He said, "Goodness is that which creates happiness." And then he was a utilitarian philosopher, British, and this other British utilitarian, Jeremy Bentham, he then turned around and said, "Well, the measure of goodness is what creates the greatest happiness for the greatest number." So yeah, these guys got it.
Yeah, and here's an interesting thought. Now, you remember we had the morality talk with Mitch, and his perspective was interesting, how we can never truly know all the effects that a certain action will have, therefore it's hard to judge the morality of it. But I disagree with that statement for several reasons. For one thing, we can listen to music on our iPods or iPhones or whatever. We can listen to music that we like that makes us happy, and it doesn't hurt anyone. Never can it just hurt somebody for us to listen to music.
Right. I think the way I understand your point. I think maybe what he means is like, for example, let's say you take one person who stays home, like so content, stays home listening to music, right? And so they're content with that. Where another person, let's say, is feeling really bad and lonely, so they go out and they meet, let's say, somebody who becomes their spouse. They meet a woman. There's a guy who meets a woman. So in other words, like that's an example of like the person. Let's say the person's bored, doesn't rely on music or something, gets into a bad mood. And this bad mood, this like maybe it's a you can even define it as an immoral act of just like being depressed and sad when one doesn't have to, then all of a sudden that leads to, like, perhaps greater happiness. So, but I do get your point that, that in general, at least for the immediate, for our immediate, time frame, that there does seem to be, actions that are, objectively good and not good. Yeah.
Yeah, and while I agree entirely with his premise that we can't predict all the effects that a lot of actions will have, I think that only applies to certain moral situations. I don't think it's universal everywhere. Like, clearly it's true if there's two people who are about to die. Like, let's say there's two people who are about to die, and you can save one or the other. It's true in that situation, you don't really know what the effects of that person that you save, what they'll do in their life after you save their life. You don't know that. That's true, but of course, whichever person we like the best, is most likely going to be the one we're going to save. But of course, remembering that nobody really has moral responsibility helps us not take that too seriously.
That's a good point. One thing I want to, like, explore is, like, think about it. Like, with happiness, a person can be happy by considering their overall life and being pleased with it. Like, they had certain goals that they want to fulfill, get married, raise children, live in a house, whatever it is, and they've gotten there, that makes them happy. Other people are, like, immersed in, like, an art, they're painters, they're musicians or whatever, or scientists, and that absorption makes them happy. People will, unfortunately sometimes drink too much, but that makes them happy. Or people will smoke weed and that makes them happy. And so, like, people will exercise. In other words, what I'm saying is, like, there are so many routes to happiness, and most people will define happiness as, in terms of what creates it. Like, most people are like, well, I'm happy when I'm around people. And see, like, the thing is that, that's not really happiness. That's what creates happiness. But what I'm intrigued with is, like, what is the nature of this experience that we can evoke through so many different, extremely different avenues.
You're right. There's so many different ways people achieve happiness. So many things that bring it about. And what's interesting about that is that means there's not just one path for everyone. And I think there's a mistake people make. They think, well, this person does this and they seem happy, so if I do everything the same as them, then I'll be happy. That tends to not work out so well because you find out you're not the same person as them.
That's true. And the other thing is, like, when we describe happiness, let's say scientifically, we kind of use a reductionist model where, we basically describe the biochemistry that, these neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine and, endorphins and stuff will get, released, and that will create this feeling of pleasure that translates into the feeling of happiness. Fine, I get that. I get that's the chemistry, but what I want to understand is, like, more more conceptually, more philosophically, what is this feeling? Like, again, the feeling of happiness disconnected what created it. What is this thing?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing because I think that's difficult for many people to do. Is they always think of happiness in connection with a certain thing. And so the idea of focusing on the feeling of happiness is one that I haven't really been able to do. I just know that there's certain things that I get a thrill out of.
And yeah, I mean, I think the reason you're not able to do it is, like, I remember, like, when I first tried it, it was difficult for me. I would have to kind of, like, think of something that made me happy and that would create the feeling. And then I would try to, like, just separate what made me happy from the feeling. But, like, that's something that our culture just doesn't teach us to do. It's not, I think if we were, like, raised from a very early age to be able to tap into that feeling and just maintain it, somehow through some kind of training or whatever, I think we'd all be really good at it. but our culture isn't designed that way, which is like, again, a real curiosity. It's like, if happiness is all we really want, it just bewilders me how we're so bad at it in general as a world.
Yeah, and here's another thing that's interesting, George. Now, there's a lot of people, they say, well, life isn't about happiness, it's about doing the right thing. It's about morality and you know what I mean? But here's the deal is I think that morality is based on happiness. Because some people do something because making others happy makes them happy. They feel like they're helping somebody, and I know that feeling, or perhaps they're doing it because they believe that they earn a better afterlife after they die if they do considered good actions that gives them good karmas or something. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I agree with you completely. That's what, again, that's why John Locke said goodness, he defined goodness as that which creates happiness. So, how could something possibly be good unless it was making people happy? Now, of course, we got to consider, like, sometimes a person might do something that makes them very happy, but might at the same time make a lot of other people unhappy. So, we have to, weigh the good, the happiness, and the unhappiness, that might come from a certain act in terms of, like, determining whether it's good. And I guess in a certain sense, some of our acts can be both good, or good and not good, but in different degrees.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought that up because here's the thing. Think about this. Now, a person, for example, who, well, they say that they get pleasure out of killing Jews. This always comes up. So whether it's the Jews or it's the blacks or whether it's the pigs or whatever, whenever someone's racist or speciesist or sexist, what they do is like for some reason they get pleasure out of discriminating against a certain type of life form and they kill them and they must be getting some pleasure out of that or why are they doing it?
Yeah, and the answer is easy. Like, for example, like, throughout the world, like, we had this Cold War with Russia and China. They were communists, we were capitalist. They were the bad guys in our eyes, we were the bad guys in their eyes. So, like, so we'd want to, if we got into a war with them, we'd want to kill them because we're seeing them as the bad guys, and they vice versa. So that always explains it. Like, people who target certain groups in their mind, very unfortunately mistakenly, much more often than not, they just, like, say, well, these people are, bad, and it's a right thing to go to war with them and all. So, like, yeah, it's
Well,
unfortunate.
yeah, one thing about this, George, is think about it. Let's say that someone gets such a pleasure out of killing things that they kill everything else and then there's nothing left for them to kill. Then they don't have a source of happiness anymore. So they have to have a happiness that's independent of killing things.
Yeah, that have to kill themselves.
I know, and that doesn't bring them happiness because they're dead.
Then you have nothing. Yeah. Again, that brings me back to the question, like, did happiness, because, like, all right, the Earth is 4.5 billion years old or so, and I think life on the Earth is about 4 billion years old and all. But I think I did some research into this, and I may be really, really wrong with this, but, like, I think the first sentient life, the first life that was capable of feeling pleasure and pain, I think they refer to them as decapods. And these are like crustaceans, like lobsters and crabs and all these, like, these crustaceans that have 10 feet. And so, like, you gotta wonder, like, before these organisms evolved, you can't say there was either happiness or unhappiness in the world, and you can't say that there was either goodness or evil, because without happiness or unhappiness, how could there be goodness or evil?
Well, that's a good point, George, because, this debate between objective and subjective morality, I used to be like a proponent of objective morality and saying, well, some things are absolutely right and other things are absolutely wrong. But at the same time, uh, they're sort of subjective in that unless there are conscious beings who are getting happiness or unhappiness, pleasure or pain out of something, how would it ever be labeled as good or bad?
Exactly. Yeah. Good and bad require sentient beings.
Yeah, and so what's interesting about this is that seems like an attribute of life as we know it these days. Like maybe some of the lowest life forms may not feel pleasure or pain, and I certainly hope not. I would certainly hope that microorganisms that are killed all the time are not feeling pain. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah, but we do know that most things that we can see without a microscope, probably are feel something, some sense of pleasure and pain.
Well, yeah, like, and you're right, because for example, like a single-celled organism in a petri dish, they might move toward where, it's darker, or move toward where there's light in that petri dish. So there's some kind of preference they have. So that might be some kind of fundamental, happiness, unhappiness.
Yeah.
They're seeking pleasure, avoiding pain.
Yeah, and also it like when you consider it, like let's say even if you were to take like an ant, one of the smallest creatures that I can see, and then you consider, well, if this ant is stepped on, it's probably killed so quick that it probably doesn't feel very much pain for very long, you know. But then say some human is in a car wreck, well, they bleed, they get injured, they body parts get torn off, they bleed slowly and they die a painful way, very long and drawn out, because the more cells you have, the more you can suffer.
Yeah, and that's why I'm so against carnism, against like, eating animals, because like you're right, in the wild, a lion will chase a gazelle and it's over. It might be over, for the gazelle within like 10, 15 seconds, whereas like in today with the factory farms, you have a female pig, a sow, that's confined to a crate where it's so small she can't even like turn around for months at a time. I mean, that is so sick. I mean, like, along with not understanding how people in our world don't get that happiness is what they really want, and then don't, understand the wisdom of just like working on it. I can't get how people are so evil as to just like, eat meat, don't think about it. That, people know what's going on because of the internet. I mean, like even back before the internet, people understood what was going on, and somehow they just like, I don't know, but it's like it's so horrific. Yeah, I think nature before human beings came along was much more merciful than the human species is. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've thought about that because, let's say you're a fish somewhere that gets eaten by a shark. Well, your head gets just bitten off and separated from whatever the rest of you. You probably are knocked out pretty quickly. Nothing at all like years of suffering in factory farms.
I know. I know.
And it's interesting, because I learned about the animal industries late in life. It wasn't until I was in my 20s when I started finding out about it. And here's what's interesting about it is that I kind of got into it because of this issue where people are asking, well, why is human life more valuable than other animals? So why do humans deserve special protection? Just to mention this quickly, is that in the abortion debate, so much of the debate centers around one side saying the unborn are human, the other side saying they're not human, and I'm like, that's not relevant to me because I no longer view humans as a special thing. So I'm like, yes, it's a human, because it's not a squirrel that I know of, but I don't. It's not about that.
No, I know. I know. We got to like, and here's the thing. Apparently, I think I learned recently that with that each generation that comes, the IQ, increases about 10%. And, I think these generations, especially now with the access to this information, and in-depth information with the internet and all, I think that maybe over the next 20, 30, 40 years, as we're dealing with climate change, because we have to deal with that, that I think people will finally, become much wiser in terms of like becoming kinder and seeking happiness and just like understanding the basic, the nature of our lives much, much better than previous generations. Partly it's because like, especially, 100 years ago, for example, people were too busy trying to survive to just like develop this kind of like practice or this art of life. Some rich people, I guess, back then, cultivated that art. But for the most part, people just were trying to survive. Whereas now, I mean, sure, people have to work 8, 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, whatever. But, after that, it's like, there's no struggle for survival. So now, like, I think the struggle is to kind of like become a better species morally and become a happier species.
Yeah, and here's the interesting thing is while of course humans don't have a free will, such an ability wouldn't even be helpful, you know? Like what's the point in being free to do something other than your strongest desire?
Right, but no, no. I mean, like, even though it doesn't make sense conceptually, but like, if I had a free will, in other words, like, if I had, because there's a me that I identify with that wants to be blissed out all the time, right?
Yeah.
So I figure if I had a free will, fine, it wouldn't be free in the sense you just mentioned, because like I would be programmed to want that anyhow. But, it'd be great to just like, all right, I want to be blissed out all the time, and I'm blissed out all the time, and everybody else would probably be blissed out also.
Exactly, because that's the interesting thing is here's one thing that shows me that people don't have that ability is that they have to believe illusions. They have to believe in certain illusions like free will, or they have to believe in, some objective meaning or purpose to life. Because otherwise they get depressed if they don't feel like they have a purpose. And I'm thinking, well, if you could bliss yourself out, if you could just choose to just feel happy easily, then you just do that. We'd all be blissed out. There would be no religion or politics. There'd be no crime. We'd all just be so blissed out. Who would care?
I hear you. Now, I have a feeling, so like, let's say 100 years from now, with genetic engineering and all we're learning about the biochemistry of happiness, I have a feeling to a large extent, people are going to be really blissed out. There's this philosopher, British philosopher, David Pearce. He incidentally, has written and talked about us not having a free will, so he gets it. He wrote this book that I found on Kindle. I think it might be a dollar or might actually be free, whatever.
Let me
Called,
guess. It's called the hedonistic imperative.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and this guy's like talking about like engineering a species of completely blissed out people. It's very cool.
Yeah, I know the name of that book. I think I actually might have it like on iBooks or something, whatever, or something like that.
And I think you can find it free online. I think he's uploaded it to Internet Archive.
Yeah, yeah, because he wants to spread the information as widely as possible.
Yep.
Yeah,
So
it's
yes, like again, we got to deal with climate change and stuff like that. But like 100 years, 200 years tops, this everybody, the human species at least is going to be blissed out. We're not going to be like torturing animals anymore. We're not going to be like hurting each other. We're just going to be. It's going to be like a heaven on earth. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's very interesting because you know what? Happy people just aren't as mean. They're people are nicer when they're happy.
And you know what's cool about this? I mean, like certainly with psychopharmacological solutions, genetic engineering, that's possible and all. But actually, we don't even need that. In other words, like if let's say everybody in the industrialized nations, the rich countries of the world, were to, and even in the other countries, I mean, this is something everybody can do. If everybody were to just like spend, let's say, even an hour a day, I mean, this is how easy this is. If everybody, on the planet were spending an hour a day just learning about happiness, practicing happiness, talking about it, whatever, I would guarantee within 6 months, a year, people, this place would be blissed out. Because like becoming happier becoming really happy, especially when you're working with everybody else on the same goal and everybody gets it. It's really a no-brainer. It is like, to be a good guitar player, you got to practice. You can't like go from not playing guitar to playing really well in a week or two. It might take a couple of years or so.
That's
But
true.
the actual, chords and stuff, it's easy. You just practice. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just it. Just like anything else that can be practiced. So I'm kind of learning to do that in a sense, realizing I guess the old method of counting your blessings, the idea thinking about the good things you have, that seems to be working for me. Realizing that I mean I have so much, there's so much I have going on, and so I'm pretty happy,
Yeah.
and
And actually,
yeah, it's like, but it's, see, here's the deal. It's not that I'm rich. It's not like the things that most people get happiness from. Because I don't own a house or a car. I don't have loads of money, and I'm certainly not having sex, which a lot of people are doing, and they think that makes them happy. But the deal is, I crave philosophical discussion. And when we do these podcasts, I just feel so blissed.
I know it's cool. It's like we can actually define happiness in terms of like a spectrum of morality. Some forms of happiness are much more good, more moral than others. I think these kinds of discussions are up there. Doing like, for example, doctors and nurses and medical staff. They devote their careers, their lives to healing people, to keeping people healthy. To the extent they get their happiness that way, that's a supremely moral form of happiness. So, but yeah, like understanding, because like a lot of times, if we're going to create a better world, we have to talk about it. We have to understand what we have to do. So these kinds of discussions are pivotal to that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. And it reminds me when you said a happier world, that made me think of something. I think your book, exploring the illusion of free will. I think the name of the publisher was A Happier World or something like that.
Well, that happier world is me. I self-published it. I
Oh,
was
so that was what you kind of named your own publisher, kind of.
That's my yeah. I created a what yeah an entity that right that published it absolutely.
Yeah, that's cool. Hey, that sounds good. A happier world, Yeah, who doesn't
Oh
want a
yeah,
happier
because
world?
what else is there, right? I mean, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, seriously, like happiness really is the biggest thing because ask anyone what they do, and why are they doing that? It's either, they work their jobs to get money so they can buy food and have a place to live. Well, why do they want to have food? Well, it makes them happy to eat and to not be hungry, you know.
right. Now here's the thing. What the challenge for us now is like when we were really young, toddlers, infants, toddlers, we basically for the most part, I think we were trying to learn skills. We were trying to, like all these adults were talking, we're trying to figure out what are they saying. Um, then we're trying to learn how to walk. Then later we're trying to learn how to write and how to read and stuff. So like when we're really young, we're learning on these skills. And also I think we're being conditioned to want things that we don't have. If we can't speak, we can't talk, we're learned to like, we're taught to want to speak, to want to walk. And so like so basically we're conditioned, very strongly to want what we don't have. But unfortunately, as the Buddha pointed out, that's a recipe for not much happiness. So, because like in my work, for about a year now, I've been working to, increase my level of happiness, and it's worked to a great extent. But I recognize that in my life, for example, like I have a choice between, let's say, sitting down, evoking the feeling of happiness, and feeling it, immersing myself in it, maintaining it, kind of like meditating on it. I've done that. It feels good. But a lot of times, you know, I would prefer to read a book, or I'd prefer to watch a TV show sometimes that, and these things are not going to create as much happiness. So then, like, it's like we've been brainwashed or, conditioned to do a lot of things that don't, sometimes these things are maybe necessary, or sometimes they may be important to greater happiness in the future, but for the most part, they just distract us. So that's the human problem, that we've been conditioned to seek things that are not happiness, and then as adults, we have to like recondition ourselves to just focus more clearly and directly on happiness.
Yeah. And yeah, we're at 30 minutes, but I want to extend this to an hour because there's still so much to say on the subject of happiness.
Sounds good.
Because here's the deal, there are things that I do that tend to make me sad because when I'm watching documentaries, like the ones about the reasons behind veganism and the animal cruelty and the climate change parts of it, that watching that stuff doesn't make me very happy. I gotta admit. But what's interesting about it is that I only had to watch those movies once. And now I'm deriving greater pleasure by not being a part of that. It's kind of a weird feeling, but just thinking about, well, I'm just eating plants and therefore no animals are harmed in the making of this food.
I agree with you. And yes, like the thing is like, yeah, I don't watch, any more videos on animal abuse and things like that because they are painful to watch. I think the idea is like once you become a vegan, once you understand the problem, I'm not sure, there's that much of a need. If you want to like, trying to change people's minds, sometimes it might help and all. But in general, once you've learned what you need to learn, I'm not sure you have to immerse yourself in all this suffering to, because you've already learned the lesson.
That's true. And another thing is I want to point out, to everybody is that you don't have to watch these documentaries to understand, the reasoning behind veganism. For one thing, I understood it from just reading about it. But for some people, they need something visual because what you see does have power. So maybe for some people, that's what it takes. But I think just the principle for me, all I needed to know was that animals do feel pain and are killed, in all these industries, and so that was all it takes. But the thing is, I have seen, some of the worst. The worst of it of all is Earthlings for sure. Um, but yeah, but so I only watched it once because I just wanted to know. Curiosity killed the cat, but the cat has more lives.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the thing is now here's my approach because what I used to do is I used to tell people why I'm a vegan and I don't want to be part of the suffering, but now I want to put a new spin on it and be positive. Because here's the idea is if I can the idea is to get in shape, get in really good shape, be strong and healthy and good looking, and in this way I can promote the idea that yes, I can be a strong, healthy dude and just eat plants. And if I do that, and many other people are doing that, there are even like bodybuilder YouTube channels where they're vegans and they're super strong. And of course, the horses are vegan, you know. And so what's interesting is everything all fits together, George. But now I'm doing it in a more happiness way. It's when by turning it into a thing about health as well, about look great, feel great, live longer. That is more positive than like, oh, the animal agriculture is causing more climate change and the animals are suffering. The thing is that's true, equally true, but it's negative. People don't like that. They don't like to focus, so they would rather believe that's not happening. But if we point out positive, like, hey, you can live longer and feel great, and all that, then it's a positive message. And so that's it, George. What I'm thinking is I want to present happiness as the highest good and determinism and awareness of causes as the road to happiness.
Yeah, and the way like that happiness connects with, for example, animal abuse and all, is with a lot of things. Like um, people eat meat because they believe that if they were not to eat this meat, that they wouldn't be as happy, and that's why people do a lot of things that they wouldn't otherwise do, like, taking too many drugs or drinking too much alcohol or something. Anytime we do something that's unhealthy for others or for ourselves, it's always kind of like as an attempt to feel happier. So, I mean, the kind of guiding strategy that kind of fuels my work on promoting happiness is that as people become happier, in ways that are benign, that don't hurt themselves or others, then there's all of a sudden no need to be cruel to other people or to be cruel to animals and all. There's just like, because a person's just happy, there's no rationale for the cruelty.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean a lot of cruelty it that is done is based on entirely non-existent reasons, like like the belief that other people deserve to suffer, because that's gone from my system. Like I never think of anybody as deserving anything. Um, and of course, I also like I feel that the message that nobody really chooses their life. They don't choose their gender, skin color, country where they're born, what language that they're taught. Because of this, you can't be racist. You can't be racist and you can't be speciesist. You just realize that you are what you are due to prior causes over which you had no control. And so you see others as an equal.
Yeah, Chandler, that's one of the reasons that I do this work on free will. I mean, like, Um, once, I would guess maybe in 30 years, I don't think it's going to take that long. When everybody gets that nobody has a free will, it might even be sooner. Um, nobody can logically, under that understanding perspective, blame anyone, including themselves, for anything. So like without blaming someone, you can't want them to suffer for what they've done. You can't want to seek revenge on them or vengeance. I mean, like, so much, I would guess that at least 90% of the conflict, on the planet, has to do with this mistaken belief in free will. Sometimes we compete for limited resources, but I think the vast majority of the competition is we're blaming each other and ourselves for what is under nobody's control. And again, once our, you know, global society overcomes that, that's going to create so much happiness, just in itself.
Yeah, and another thing that's interesting, George, is even people who they believe in free will, they may not agree with what somebody did, but then once they hear the person's story of why they did what they did, then they have sympathy for them and think, well, I don't blame you. Like you did a bad thing, but I don't blame you because at the time that seemed like the best thing to you. And what they're doing is they're looking at the causality that compelled that person, and then they see that person as innocent, but that's what we're doing with everybody now.
I know, and people say that they believe in free will, but again, in the English language, we have three popular expressions that kind of suggest that on a deeper level they understand we don't have free will. Like, for example, like if somebody, is very unfortunate, let's say homeless or something, people will say, "Well, there, but for the grace of God go I." Or if like somebody's doing something wrong and a third person is blaming them, becoming angry with them, we might say to that third person, "Hey, this person is doing the best they can." Or the last one is like, don't judge a person, and this relates to what you were saying before, don't judge a person until you've walked a mile in their shoes. Because when you understand the life they've had and the experiences they've had, the kind of person they were created to be, because we don't create ourselves, then you understand that they had to act the way they did.
Yeah. And and other things like father like son, or the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and other
Nice.
examples.
Excellent. Those are good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting because when, and you got to admit that considering the whole process of natural selection, realizing that we would not be here if our ancestors had not run away from predators. You know what I'm saying? That's one example. That there's a certain way things had to be for survival and the avoidance of pain. And
You,
due to that, realizing that free will would almost, it's not even a coherent concept, but it would be where there's no pleasure or pain, where we'd be completely ambivalent as to whether or not we were eaten alive. Like we wouldn't really care.
well, I don't say that again.
Well, yeah, what I'm saying is if we just freely willed things and our choices were not based on prior causes, or then when we could just like choose not to run away from predators, we could choose to just stay and burn in flames instead of running out of the burning building. You know what I'm saying?
All right. We'd have no reason to do one thing over another. Absolutely.
Exactly. And because we're compelled for greater satisfaction to go towards pleasure and away from pain, the hedonic imperative cancels out the freedom of choice. Even if you leave out the causality and acausality, just the hedonic imperative alone is enough to do it.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Yep.
Yeah. And so it's interesting because when you look at it, everything about science, same cause, same effect. Everything about evolution, everything about anything that happens, it has to be that way. I mean, like if we can't be given a choice in whether to breathe or not, you don't breathe, you die.
I know. I know. But again, like the idea is like, I mean, even with the free will thing is good. Um, sometimes I wonder. Sometimes I wonder whether, let's say our group all of a sudden had an epiphany, that like, all right, this free will thing is important, but this happiness thing is like actually perhaps much more important because it's more foundational. I'm wondering if we might do the world more good by actually all of a sudden just like making all our podcasts about happiness, about how to make ourselves happier as individuals and how to make our world happier.
Well,
Um,
yeah, well, George, I think we're already off to a great start, and here's why. Because the revelation that there's no free will is the key that opens the door to happiness. I really think so. Because you lose the blame, the guilt, the regrets. You lose so many negative, unhappy feelings once you have this understanding that it's not your fault. And then since we have our free will science and religion podcast, but then since we're doing impersonal opinion, and we've talked about happiness on at least two other previous episodes in this series. And so what we're doing is we're sort of going back and forth. We're talking about the free will thing, but then we're also talking about happiness, and that the biggest thing ever that would happen would be a happiness pill, or just something that blissed us out. That's what we really want.
well, it's true. I mean, in a certain sense, if we were to um, pursue happiness more naturally, that might be better, but we have to recognize because we don't have a free will, many of us wouldn't have the motivation to, let's say, work on their happiness an hour a day and do certain things. So, yeah, so like if there was, there actually may be, happiness pills out there. Like, for example, I just learned about this ingredient called SAM-E, SAM-E, and it's a natural ingredient that our body actually produces, but it can be manufactured. And like it was discovered, I think, in Italy in 1952, somewhere around there. And in Italy, as well as a few other countries, European countries, it's actually used as an antidepressant. But I have a feeling that this, some antidepressants won't make regular people who aren't depressed um, happier, but I think this Sammy does. Like I think Prozac, I think, makes regular people happier. If a person isn't depressed, but let's say they're not feeling good, I think they'll actually there these some of these things like Prozac and a few others will take a person who's like, mildly dissatisfied and make them happier than the average person. So yes, I mean, I hope that the pharmacological industry, wisens up, understands that, like, that there'd be a lot. I mean, and people could spend maybe $10 a month for these pills, and it wouldn't have to be expensive. And all of a sudden, from one thing, you have a much much happier world. That would be the coolest thing.
Yeah, I think that's really our goal, and understanding that we don't have free will is just one, it's just a means by which to help the most of humanity get to that goal. And here's the deal, George, is now I haven't read The Tipping Point yet. It arrived in the mail and I haven't had time to look at it. But I've been thinking about the idea that things start out small and they get big. And well, just think about the majority of the world as it is right now. They believe in a number of things. They believe, yeah, for one thing, they believe in free will. Another thing, they believe in God or a higher power, as we mention a lot. Well, whenever you get the majority, even if you can't get all of them, if you can get over 50% of the world to do something like half of the like at least half of the world has established that they know how to be happy. They really know how to be happy. They've learned how to practice happiness. They've learned the right practices and beliefs that achieve happiness. Well, then guess what happens? Then you've got a sort of a peer pressure going on, like, hey, there's all these happy people. I want to be like them. So then happy people become so attractive that the sad people learn from the happy people. And if in that world nobody's believing in free will, then people aren't going to tell them, well, just freely will yourself to be happy. They're going to help explain the causes of what makes them happy.
Yeah, what's cool, I'm not sure if Gladwell gets into this very specifically in The Tipping Point, but like it may actually not be as high as 50%. Like I think it may vary depending on what exactly the thing to be popularized might be. But like with happiness, I think if even let's say 10, 15% of the population really got it, they had these epiphanies and just understood that the happiness is what life is about, then that would probably be enough to create a very powerful happiness industry to make sure that these happiness pills are available and they're safe without side effects. So yeah, it might be, a much, fewer people to just all of a sudden, then soon after that would become everyone. It'd be
Well,
very cool. Like cell phones, I guess. Probably cell phones probably happened that same way. After a certain percentage had them, then all of a sudden, marketers realized that everybody would want them and that the cost came down and all.
yeah, it's absolutely true because just look how certain things catch on. Look at the YouTube videos that have, like, 13 million views and stuff. It'll be a funny cat video or it'll be pink fluffy unicorn dancing on rainbows. Like it's, I mean, some internet meme will get started and then before you know it, it's everywhere. And obviously, things wouldn't spread if people did not derive pleasure from sharing them.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the thing. I actually at a happiness club meeting on Thursday, I met two young kids. One of them's from England and his girlfriend is, I think, from Dubai. They're both animators. And I checked out their videos. Apparently it's to do animation. Like the guy said, like for 20 seconds of animation, it takes about a week to do that. It's really, I had no idea it was that complicated. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm going to suggest to them if they come to the next meeting next Thursday, I'm going to suggest, listen, try to get something, based on viral, a brief animation based on happiness to go viral. That's one way, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, and things like that, certain things catch on if they're in animation form. For example, the movie Frozen finally topped Beauty and the Beast as my favorite Disney movie. Because
Cool.
for years it was Beauty and the Beast. No other Disney movie compared to Beauty and the Beast because of the messages contained, in it. Like with the Beauty and the Beast, the message is that someone can love you for who you are, and it doesn't matter that you look like a big hairy beast.
Yeah,
I
yeah, that's good.
loved that. I just loved that message so much, and that was actually Gaston who was acting like the monster. But of course,
Well,
you can't blame him. He didn't have a free will. But yeah, but then Frozen, the reason that Frozen meant so much to me, and it has to many people, is that you don't follow the advice that Elsa's parents gave her. The conceal, don't feel, hide who you are, hide things about yourself. Because what happened was she exploded eventually, and then the whole land was frozen. And it's like what happens when real world problems meet magic.
that's cool. I haven't seen Frozen yet. I think I'm gonna check it out. That sounds
Yes,
good.
you will want to because it's become such a popular thing. And yes, but just definitely there are certain messages contained in each Disney movie. You'll notice. Like, yeah, there's just so many that I could go on forever about that, but I won't. But like basically, yeah, there's if something is embedded in a movie, then it becomes popular. The songs in it, the storyline in it, everybody talks about it. Well, it certainly happened with My Little Pony, no doubt about that. Um, so that's what we need is we need something to go viral. And I think that we may eventually get a documentary made about the no free will thing, and that would be absolutely excellent. But I think it's going to take more than that. I think it's going to take different messages appeal to different people. There could be cartoons there as well as books. I think story formats are kind of going to be effective when people have story formats, about certain things.
Yeah, another avenue with the free will thing is like, in my last book, I connected it with climate change denial. And it's kind of like an obscure, abstract kind of connection that many people who really don't know much about psychology wouldn't intuitively understand. But, if some researchers, some psychologists follow up on that idea and do experiments where they determine that, hey, if people like believe in free will and these scientists are telling them that they and their friends and their family are destroying the climate, then they have to deny this because it's too severe an indictment for them to accept. That might be, because like a lot of times, you know for the free will thing, I think a lot of people don't don't get the benefits. I think you need a pretty strong imagination sometimes to really see how harmful the belief is. But if it were connected with something that's really urgent, like climate change, that might be something else that really, finally gets the world to pay attention.
Yeah, and it's interesting because while climate change is certainly probably one of the biggest issues, you know, the fact that it's not a positive subject very much for people. It's still negative to think about at all. People don't like it. So yeah, bringing a positive message to the no free will message is very important. How it's done is everything. Presentation is almost everything because something may be true, but if people see it in a negative light, then it tends to not catch on.
Yeah, and again, like, if we create that app and put that app out there with linking free will belief with the fat shaming, and with not being able to lose weight, gaining weight and stuff, that actually might or just as a way to get people to understand that there's no free will, even without the benefits of helping people lose weight. I mean, that'd be good also, of course, but yeah, again, it might be just the finding the right message.
Yeah. And I do think that the whole weight loss topic I think it's probably the best lead that we're on so far because it's so obvious. like I said, it's one thing with climate change to deny it's happening. It's easy to do that if it's not directly affecting you. And it's easy with other forms of murder that are being done to think if it's not happening to you directly, it's not a big deal. But, everybody at this point, either they've been overweight or they know someone who has, so it's relatable. It's relatable on an everyday scale. I mean, nobody is going to say, well, it's just an opinion whether people are obese or not. Well, no, it's not an opinion. We can all see it. So unless you're blind, you know.
Right. And again, you just ask people like, well, if you have a free will, why can't you lose weight? Or why did you gain weight if you have the free will to not gain weight?
Yeah. And it's interesting too, George, because one thing about this whole weight loss thing is now the best people, and this is one of my impersonal opinions, but I think it makes absolute perfect sense, is the best people to go to for advice about weight loss are those who have been fat and they figured out how to lose weight. I mean, don't talk to some person who's been skinny all their life. Just some person who's never had any experience. You'd want to go to someone who has experience and knows what they're talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's the deal is no amount of head knowledge, no amount of book reading can really replace, experience. Like I've heard them say like there's book smarts and there's street smarts. There's practical experience that you've lived through, and then there's when you're reading a book, if you're reading about depression and you're reading about people who suffer from, clinical depression, it's not the same as having an experience where you've been depressed in your life. It's not the same at all. Experience is always more powerful than just a bunch of words.
Yeah, I think one thing they've discovered is in general, the most successful people in the world aren't, for example, the straight A students. The most successful people are like maybe B students, BC students, but they're very good at emotional intelligence. They're very good at understanding other people because apparently that's what a lot of, success in business is about.
Yeah, it really is because what it comes down to is, yeah, success does depend if you're living in a human society. It depends on understanding those other humans and how they think. That's very clear. I mean, not so much if you're just on a deserted island eating coconuts. Then you would not even have the ability to talk, but it wouldn't matter in that case. But for most of us, we live in a society where communicating with other people is a very important skill. So emotional intelligence is an important factor. And I've learned a lot of that lately just because talking to you guys on podcasts, has just really helped me learn how to talk to people.
Yeah, there's a guy, Daniel Goleman. He wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence. It might be 20 years ago, whatever, but I think that's a great source to really like understand the importance of that kind of intelligence in the world.
Yeah, it's amazing. But yeah, happiness really is what it's all about. And I think awareness, just awareness of why you're doing what you're doing is everything. I mean, that's what the whole determinism message is, because what's funny is, ironically, it grants you a strange sort of freedom. It's paradoxical, but you do something and think, well, why am I doing this? And then once you think about it long enough, well, I'm doing this not because I want to, but because I'm afraid of what other people will think of me if I do or don't do this thing. So then what happens, this is what happens with me, George. When I find out that I'm just doing something to please somebody else, sometimes I'm like, "Oh, forget that." And then I do something that I want to do.
No, I hear you. I hear you. We're conditioned to please people a lot. Comes from like starting to please our parents. We're at, I think, the 60-minute mark, right?
Yeah, so I guess it's about time to end this episode then. Okay. You've been listening to Impersonal Opinion with Chandler Klebs and George Ortega talking about, what makes people happy, the feeling of happiness, and how happiness is really what it's all about. So I hope you've enjoyed something, and so try to go and be very happy.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, thank you for listening, and goodbye.